Good morning, familia. This is Ray Collazo, the host and founder of the Found Translation Talk Show. Found Translation stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. Thank you so much for joining us. And we couldn't talk about politics and what's going on in the news without a great friend to the show, someone that's going to bring a lot of perspective as sort of a DC Latino political insider and a Latino messaging guru. He's going to help us guide these conversations around the issues we really got to talk about here in 2022 as it relates to the Latino perspective on politics and what's going on in the news and the direction of our country. Want to welcome to the show a great friend, Enrique Chaurand. Enrique, welcome finally to the Found Translation Talk Show.
Rafael, muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to help catch up the Found in Translation community on what you've been up to as well this past year.
And well, I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah. But, this is exciting for me. I'm really happy to be part of this and looking forward to the conversations that we're going to be having, not only today, but in the future. There's been a lot happening since the last time you were on. And this past year, not only the last few years because of COVID, but, so much going on as it relates to the Latino political landscape. And then, of course, we've got the 2022 midterms coming up. I'm also super excited to announce that later on in the show, Rafael and I are going to be joined by Jessie Buendia, who is the National Director of Green for All, a Dream Corps initiative. You're going to want to hear from her and the updates that their organization is doing. And again, we're going to talk about an exciting collaboration between Dream Corps and UnidosUS Action Fund, the UnidosUS Action Fund, to engage Latinos in the climate change movement. So, Rafael,
very appropriate, Enrique, that Jessie's on the show because this show is going to be released on Earth Day, which is part of Earth Month. And as you're going to find out later in the show, not only are Latinos as engaged as anyone and have a great understanding of the climate change, of the impact of climate change on our society, but there's a lot of exciting opportunities to engage the Latino community in this movement to lead it nationally and globally. So just really excited to have Jessie on the show. You'll see her in a minute. But I know, Enrique, we wanted to get to a few political headlines, catch people up on what we've been up to, and get people caught up on the Latino political landscape here in 2022.
That's right. There's already a lot of talk going on nationally about the importance of the Latino vote in 2022, something that you and I have talked about. But I wanted to get your thoughts. I'd love for you to share also with our viewers and our listeners here. Do you think that the Latino voters will play a decisive role during the midterm elections this year? And if so, what are some of the issues that you think are the most pressing, and not only for Latino voters, but for voters overall? And how will that impact, engaging Latinos and getting them actually, encouraging them to actually, and motivated, I should say, to go to the polls and vote for the midterms?
Well, Enrique, before we get into sort of the sort of electoral landscape, which Latinos need to understand how critical a role we will play. We really literally will decide the U.S. Senate this year and some other key races we're going to talk more about in a second. But I just want to acknowledge and honor the fact that Latino across the spectrum, but we're really worn out, I guess, for lack of a better term right now, between sort of the residue of the COVID-19 pandemic, which thankfully, we're sort of, evolving into another stage of that. We were the hardest hit community. Our community disproportionately was hospitalized, got ill, passed away. It was impacted economically. And we're still dealing with the recovery in a very real way with working people in this country, particularly in the Latino community. That's impacted our politics, and that's impacted our interest in politics, quite honestly. So with all the challenges that we have, and also loved ones thinking about in solidarity with the wonderful people of Ukraine. I know I have a cousin on the front lines on the Poland-Ukraine border. It's part of a U.S. military. So all of these issues are very real for us, and it's hard. It's going to be challenging to engage our community in voting when there's so much going on. That being said, it's very important for the Latino community to understand that if we have no choice but to engage in this process, because if you're frustrated now, we cannot allow this right-wing, increasingly hostile white nationalist political party, which is incredible to me. This is happening in 2022. The current state of the Republican Party, to take over Congress and take over more of these governors' mansions and control our voting systems in statewide level, which is potentially on the docket here in November. So it's very important that Latinos understand that the Senate is in our hands. We will decide as Latino voters what party controls the Senate. It's a 50-50 split. There's 9 seats really in play. All of them have, even in the great state of New Hampshire, the Granite State, we work really closely with the Latino leaders there. All of us have either significant voting populations, like the obvious ones, the Nevadas, the Arizonas, the Floridas, but very significant swing votes. My home state of Pennsylvania, for perspective, in 2020, Biden's net victory in the Latino vote in Pennsylvania was 80% of the margin of victory for him in the state. And we know how critical Pennsylvania is. So, and that's not to speak to all the congressional races around the country, the governor's races, the other row offices, which are critically important to our state policy initiatives around the country. So very important elections coming up in 2022.
So I think you laid out the case, obviously, very clearly on how Latinos are going to be able to tilt, right, those races. I think we even saw some evidence of this in the last presidential election, right? I know there were some things that, you were quoted in saying how Latinos played a role. And, it was even reported by even mainstream media that Latinos helped push some candidates over the top. So it sounds like, in your opinion, this is going to be the same case again this year. Can you speak a little bit more about that on the momentum that we carried from the presidential and even into some of these races? I think of some Senate races, right, that are coming up that you alluded to, but even this past, right, during the presidential, some of these senators who were, the Latino vote was critical in getting them those margins of victory, widening those margins of victory to actually help them get into office.
Well, I mean, it's clear, and you could debate. This started really in 2008 with the historic election of our first Black president, President Obama, where the Latinos became a very prominent part of his coalition, and really in working with African Americans and other emerging majority of this country, pushing him over the top in his 2 historic elections. Fast forward, we now have both political parties out of necessity needing to engage the Latino vote. And we're seeing even the Republican Party, going after sort of a niche and finding ways to divide our electorate in very strategic ways for them. So we're seeing around the country great interest in activism, great interest in having our voice heard. And I think one of the things that's so exciting about this time period, and our guest coming up is a great example of that, is that the Latino leaders community is not just standing up as voters, but we're standing up as leaders of this country, saying we need to really carry on the values of this democracy of this country we care about so much, and the values of our community. We need to step up and take leadership positions. In the case of our guest, Jessie Buendia, in activism around climate change on a national level, even well beyond the Latino community, nationally, moving our community as a nation towards understanding and mobilizing around climate change. A host of new, exciting Latino political candidates. Obviously, on a national level, figures like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are looked upon, and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto are looked upon as sort of national embodiments of Latina political leadership. But we see them all the time. Great friend of mine in Brooklyn, Councilwoman Alexa Aviles, and I could go on and on. There's dozens, hundreds of emerging young Latino leaders, most of which are Latinas, who I think are really embodying what it's not just about waiting for parties to wine and dine us. It's about us wanting a seat at the table, demanding a seat at the table, so we can really move not only our community forward, but move our country forward in a very positive direction.
One last point on that, then I'm going to get to my next question. I think given the polarization of the country, right, it's becoming more and more divided. So both parties are looking for those communities, right, that can help put them over the top. So it's also part of their calculus. I think you would agree that that's part of it, right? When while both parties have, historically worked with the Latino community, when you're talking a margin of victory of 1,000 votes, and then even some races could be hundreds of votes, right? Ensuring that your candidate is speaking to the Latino community in a way that resonates with them, can actually, who should benefit you and would benefit you. So I think it's interesting too, just from a political science perspective, right? When you're counting votes.
That's right.
In some of these races, right, where it could be it could go either way with just a couple hundred votes, right? The
But Enrique,
Latino community in some of these states are going to make the difference, right? And they
well,
have
and
already.
you just hit on something really important. One of the buzz concepts that's happening. One of the things I get frustrated around. One of the things, the reasons why we're rebooting the Found Translation talks to really focus on our political portfolio and engage Latino leaders like Jessica, who's coming up, and you, Enrique, and really telling the truth about the Latino electorate and what's going on in our community, is that a lot of stereotypes and a lot of pessimistic lenses are placed upon our community. Well, you already see it in the national media. The national media spin, not the Latino spin, not the community spin, in national media is that, well, Latinos aren't going to be into this election and they're leaning Republican. Look at what happened in South Florida, in South Texas, South Florida in 2020. In the same community in South Texas that moved 5-6 points to Trump in 2020, when Democrats had essentially zero and very little, if any, investment until the very last second in South Florida for the in South Texas for the entire cycle. That same community has just had a very progressive young Latina immigration rights lawyer, Jessie Cisneros, push a very established, incredibly well-funded conservative Democratic congressperson to the brink, and now he's got a runoff election. So which one is it? What's the difference? The difference is Jessie Cisneros is out there organizing in our community and is connecting with a message that resonates with a significant portion of our community in South Texas. In the same way that there are times more conservative messages that resonate with some people in our community. So right. The answer here is, if it's regardless of party, if whatever your issue and whatever your worldview is, the answer is not to assume we're your base or to ignore us or to run away when the other side tries to cater our vote. It's about investing in local leadership that's authentic to organize our community around the issues they care about locally. To that point, and one of the great lessons that we learned with the work we're doing, and again, for the last year, I've been the executive director of the UnidosUS Action Fund, which is the political arm of UnidosUS, the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights organization. The biggest lesson I learned was a reaffirmation of the power of local voices and local leaders, particularly Latina leaders, to tell the story about what's really important in the Latino community, not about these divisive social issues, but really what's important. So I want to play this video, Enrique, that our team put together that aired across digital and television platforms throughout the Southwest during the fight for Build Back Better and making sure that home care provisions, child care provisions, and paid leave were in the final package. We're still battling that, but I want to show this video of Angela Flores, a great leader in Arizona, talking about how these issues impact her family.
In early 2021, my mother suffered a stroke, and little did we know how much it would change our lives. I wanted nothing more than to stay home and care for her, but my family couldn't afford for me to be out of the workforce. There are millions of families in America just like mine. We need paid family medical leave. Congress, please act now.
Enrique, now that's powerful.
Sure.
Now that's powerful. Real. There's no paid actors here, brother. That's real. That is a Latina leader who, by the way, is very prominent in Arizona. And when we approached her about trying to identify one of her clients to tell their story, she broke down to us and said, you know what? I think I want to tell this story about my mom because, these are people that are established. These are professional people. My mother was a very prominent local leader in her own right before she retired. That almost were embarrassed to talk about the economic strain as middle-class professional people that this illness impacted multiple households in their family. So that's the kind of courage and that's the kind of stories we need to tell. And that's part of the great collaboration that we're working on our UnidosUS Action Fund with Jessica Buendia. We're going to get to her in a second. But before we get to her really quickly, Enrique, I want to introduce the Found Translation community to you, because in your own right, brother, you are a celebrated communications professional, DC insider, I like to tell you. So Enrique, from your work in journalism and working for the Biden administration and many other roles, you really have established yourself as a go-to for Latino media messaging when it relates to politics and policy. So why don't you share with us your perspective in this sort of moment in our political history, what you're hearing in Washington, D.C. You're talking to Latino leaders around the country. You're analyzing, what's coming, the messaging, what's coming out of the White House, and how that may or may not resonate with our community. So just your initial perspective you want to share with our Found Translation community about where we're at here in 2022.
Thank you, Rafael. Really appreciate that. And Thank you for all the love, the guru piece especially. I don't know if I'll try to live up to the hype here. But no, I have not worked with I've worked with the Biden administration on the periphery, but I did work in the Clinton and the Obama administrations. I think, this is an opportunity that the Biden administration has, and Democrats in general, right, to seize upon a moment where the divisiveness, as you alluded to in the opening of your of the podcast, can really drive Latino voters and speak to Latino voters, and just communicate and Latinos in general about the work that the Democratic Party has done. When you play that ad right now, I kept thinking about the opportunities that the administration has had to talk about what they've done with not only COVID relief money that came down and really helped millions of families, to extending the child tax, or putting in the child tax credit, which was another huge benefit for Latino families. And of course, we'll see what they're going to do with Build Back Better. I feel like the party and the administration, they have not found their legs. They're still struggling to figure out how we can talk about all of the great things that this administration has put in place, along with congressional leaders, to help families, specifically Latino families, which have really, really gained, or at least been helped quite a bit, by the investments that they've made. And when I talk to colleagues and friends that are in the administration, I mean, there is some frustration on their end. I think they feel like they could be doing better, but you don't get into this work unless you really have a calling to do it, right? It's a grind. It's 24/7. You're always making sure that what messaging is coming out and the programs that you're putting out there are going to benefit the entire country. And especially if you're a Latino appointee, right? You have a very specific lens and a seat at the table that a lot of people don't have. So you have an opportunity to influence policy, to influence law, to influence, funding, and how these programs are going to impact and help the Latino community and communities that we serve. But they need to do a better job. When I say they, Democrats, and of course the White House needs to do a better job of talking about the wins that they've had. I think when you punch back, that's good. I feel like the Republican Party has, for decades, done a really good job of staying focused on message and staying disciplined. Whether it's the dog catcher in Atlanta, Georgia, who's a Republican, all the way to Senator McConnell. I mean, they do not deviate from the script. They're very good about that. Democrats aren't so much that disciplined. I think if they took a book out of the Republican playbook, or took a play out of the playbook of the Republicans, that they would do much better. And I think you would start to see slowly Biden's approval ratings going up, people understanding, hey, oh yeah, I did get that child tax credit. It absolutely helped me. Or if you're a small business, I was able to get a loan to save my business during COVID.
That's right.
My family did that. My parents own a restaurant in Kansas City, and in my hometown, and had they not had help from the SBA, who knows where they would be.
There's telling the story of what they've done, and then there's also telling a story and relating it to the current realities of what people are going through. And we're going to talk on this episode and future episodes about, what are the issues impacting our community. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Most people are going to tell you, not only the gas prices, which is the most visible thing, it's advertised on every corner. So it has sort of an outsized impact on our psyche, but just the rising cost of housing, which is related to the climate change conversation we're going to have in a moment, as well as just the cost of everything nowadays, our groceries and everything else. And so they have to address these issues in the lens of how people are feeling. And Enrique, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to introduce our very special guest onto the show. We're really excited to have this conversation. We're honored to have Jessica Buendia back on sort of the relaunch of the Found Translation Talk Show. We're going to hear from a sort of some best of highlights. Betty D, the legendary dance pop singer from Sweet Sensation from the 90s, was on the show and did an impactful monologue about the need to support our Latina domestic survivor advocates. And then a fantastic stand-up comedian, a great friend, Ellie Castro, had a very light moment with a legend in Latino sports, which is going to put a smile on Enrique's face. So let's hear from Betty and Ellie, and then we'll bring Jessica onto the show.
I mean, no one, no abuela, no mami, no tía, no hermanas, no hijas, primas, amigas, desconocidas should fear for their lives and their right to live. So today and every day, Bomba Life and our families, the Bomba Life family, stands against domestic violence in our communities. Everyone deserves a relationship free of domestic abuse. Now, full of love, compassion, support, equality, encouragement, safety, and empowerment. That's what they deserve. Now, we will survive by together changing the abusive culture and traditions. We will together stop the shove and start the love.
Mira, I had the honor of meeting Bernie at the barbershop. We share the same barber in New York. And my barber was like, yeah, man, I know Bernie, Bernie comes by here all the time. I'm like, Bernie Williams does not come by. You crazy, man. That's Bernie Williams, man. That's 51, dog. You know Bernie Williams? Nacho, Bernie Williams pasa por aquí todo rato. Bernie pasa. Wasn't Bernie here a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, man, Bernie was here. I said, you got to stop lying, man. My Bernie Williams is not going to come by this little barbershop, please. And I swear to you, in through the door comes Bernie Williams. and normally I'm picky about the cut. I'm like, get off. That's Bernie Williams. But he was so, like normal, chill. Hey, how are you, man? Hey, you busy? I'm like, Papa, I'll get off the chair right now. You can have it.
You gotta love Ellie and Bernie Williams. I know, Enrique, that puts a smile on your face, brother. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to the Found Translation Talk Show, where this is the home for Latino political conversation. You're not going to want to miss our weekly episodes. We're going to be releasing them on YouTube and across all of our audio podcast platforms on Fridays. And so I think it's very appropriate, Enrique, that on Earth Day, when this show will be released, we feature this very special guest to talk about the great work she's doing to empower the Latino community in the environmental movement. And as part of that, a great collaboration we've had with her over the last few weeks. You're on mute, Enrique.
Absolutely. Jessie, Buendia, very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, you too. Thank you so much. I got a little bit of the last conversation about the political context that Latinos are in, and I just feel so excited to be here on this call today. Both you guys are such dynamic leaders, and it's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to be here.
Well, let me tell our viewers a little bit about you. You're very accomplished. You've done so much in your career. And, given the fact that we have a Latina leading this wonderful work at Dream Corps and Green for All, Jessie, so for all of those out there who are watching us, is the Vice President of Sustainability and the National Director of Green for All, which is an initiative of Dream Corps. They work at the intersection, of the environmental, economic, and racial justice movements. And before joining Dream Corps and Green for All, Jessie held positions within the public, philanthropic, and nonprofit sector. So it's so great to have you here today. Thank you again for being with us. So tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Green for All, why it is so important that we begin to have a conversation. Not begin, we've had conversations, but that we start to really talk about climate in a way that not only impacts the Latino community, but all communities. I feel like many times the alarm bells are rung. It's like, sirens are going off. Climate is an issue. We don't have much time. Why do you feel that the work that you're doing, why it's so important, but why do you feel that people are just not necessarily paying as much attention to it and giving it the urgency that it deserves? And how really, and then I have another question, about Latino and the impact that it has on Latino communities and what you all are doing there to target Latino families and telling them how they can play a role in bettering our climate.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys covered it. Latinos are tired right now. And I think to be able to come out of a pandemic, to deal with the constant immigration issues that are hitting us, and then some of the economic inequalities that are emerging. I mean, there's just a lot of strain, as evidenced by so many of the testimonials in the videos that Ray presented. on our communities that it's hard to think about what the future looks like when you're thinking about what today looks like. And so I think for Green for All and Dream Corps, it's really important for us to not just be looking at climate change as an environmental issue, but really thinking about it as an economic justice issue as well as a racial justice issue, because it means really examining climate change through the intersectional and complex nature of how people live their lives. And so for us, we're really invested in trying to figure out what is that sweet spot, within a growing green economy that could actually lift up all boats, Latinos, African Americans, people of color across the country.
Jessica, it's so great to have you on the show, and it's been great to reconnect. I'm often curious. We're going to talk a little bit about the collaboration we've had with Green for All, Dream Corps, and UnidosUS Action Fund in a second, to really dive into this question around how Latinos are engaged in thinking about the climate change movement and really the future of our planet, the future of our environment, in Florida specifically, and soon around the country. But I wanted to take a quick step back because I'm often curious about the activist journey. So yours is very distinct in that you're a prominent Latina leader in the climate change space, which until this past decade was incredibly white and not very diverse, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities for Latinos to have such a prominent role. So, but you're in this incredible position. So I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience is curious, how did your journey lead you to Green for All in the environmental justice movement?
Yeah, well, I got involved really early. I grew up in Iowa as a child of Mexican immigrants.
There you
And
go.
so I was in a very not diverse part of this country. My family and we lived in Section 8 housing when we first came to this country. And I got my first job in fourth grade, picking up recycling from all of the different apartment units and bringing it to the local community center. And the experience helped me earn a little cash, which was great for my family, but also it inspired me to learn about the environmental movement. And fast forward 30 years as the national director of Green for All, a program of Dream Corps, I get to work with Republicans, Democrats, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, white folks, all folks across issue areas to ensure that low income families like mine have access to the economic opportunities in the green sector in an effort to transform neighborhoods into thriving and resilient places to live, work, and play. In addition, I'll say, as part of just the momentum and the movement in this space, I shared this with you earlier, but I'll share it with the audience because I'm so excited. I became a mom for the second time 3 weeks ago.
God bless you.
And oh my gosh, there's nothing like that moment to just reinvigorate the passion and commitment to protecting the planet for the next generation and 7 generations after us. And so I feel inspired just by this being something that people, in roles like myself that are beginning to look different than the large, traditional environmental movement, that they could be inspiring other generations of people to keep building and broadening that umbrella and that tent. Because at the end of the day, this is an issue that affects humanity as a whole, and we need to come together as humanity to solve it.
Jessica, we're going to have another episode down the road to just talk about that conversation. Enrique's wife, who's a prominent political operative on a very national level, former Obama administration appointee in her own right, Teresa Chaurand, it comes onto the show. She's one of our autism parent advocates, and so we have some real conversations around that. So the new journey of motherhood and family for you, I think is something very important that Latino families don't have a lot of spaces to talk about enough. So we should just have a separate conversation and bring some
Yeah.
parent advocates around there, and I can share. It'll give me an opportunity to share more about me and my wife's story with our oldest son, Troy. I did want to ask you before we bring Enrique back to talk about our wonderful collaboration. What have you learned? I mean, this is a very, you got a big job, my friend. People on LinkedIn are very impressed by you, and this is you're leading a very prominent organization, has a lot of different, has a vast array of ways that you're impacting the community, not only environmental space but other justice, civil rights issues. So, what has been a lesson over the last few years around this journey around organizing our community with such daunting goals? Ambitious goals that you'd like to share with our Found in Translation audience, many of which are themselves community leaders run nonprofit organizations, and are people that really just care about these issues. But oftentimes it's hard for them to sort of get their arms around how they can make a real impact.
Yes, definitely. So, for us, in regards to engaging people around climate change work, it's hard. It's hard. You really have to connect the impacts of climate change to people's daily lives.
Yeah.
And so, my previous job, I worked within the Governor's Office of Planning and Research in the state of California on long-term planning for the state. And it was all about the built environment, infrastructure, building healthy, resilient communities. And we'd be asking people to come in and do charrettes for like infrastructure investments that were going to be there 30 years from now. People are like, solve my problems today.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that
I may not be here in 30. I mean, people are honest about it. Yeah, that might help my grandkids, but whatever. Who cares?
Totally. Well, and then, so to the extent that we're really connecting it to what people can see, hear, feel today, it's very important. So for us, really messages around health and the impact of our pocketbooks in the communities that I grew up with in Iowa, but also here in California. Heat exhaustion from being outside disproportionately affects Latinos in the agricultural and the construction sectors. Also, for those of us who've had the privilege to work indoors, high energy bills associated with air conditioning all day long affects us financially. And then for people, especially in places like Florida, flooding in neighborhoods, and the lack of infrastructure upgrades to deal with it because of extreme weather events, those are things that cause property damage and create health hazards for communities. So when we actually get down and start talking to people, these are the stories that we hear from Black and Brown communities. And once we really take the time to listen and center their voices and concerns, we start to realize how the messaging needs to be improved about how climate change is something that's impacting you today, not impacting you tomorrow. And so at Dream Corps Green for All, we're committed to translating those experiences into action, building the leadership and advocacy skills of people most impacted by climate change, including Latinos, and getting them involved in our campaigns, programs, and partnerships, one of which is with a very prominent and exciting organization that Ray leads.
Amen, Sister Enrique. You teed up Enrique perfectly.
That's right.
So let's talk about this collaboration, brother.
Perfect segue. Jessie, I wanted to ask really quickly about the canvas and the collaboration that we did with Unidos, that you all did with UnidosUS Action Fund. Given that this is the Earth Day episode, tell us a little bit about why you felt it was important not only to partner with UnidosUS with the Action Fund, but also why, finding out the attitudes of Latino voters in Florida about climate, why that's so important. I mean, you alluded to some of it about making sure that you elevate Black and Brown voices. I think in many ways, what we learned from the survey here really helped to shape and form some of the information or some of the messaging that will be going forward and really show the attitudes that Latino voters and Latino individuals have in Florida about climate.
Absolutely. So Dream Corps Green for All, we're committed to really growing our base of Black and Brown folks in the green and economic justice movements. Dream Corps Green for All, we identified an amazing partner in you guys for an opportunity to commission a survey with the real focus of hearing the priorities of newly registered Latino voters in 3 counties, Miami-Dade, Orange, and Osceola. So, not surprising, we learned that Latinos at home, but also abroad, are at the front lines of the climate crisis because of the nature of where we live and work. We actually were able to create a very diverse set of respondents. 30% of them are registered Republicans, 33% were registered Democrats, and 37% had no political affiliation. And what we were surprised about, and I say genuinely surprised about, is that we learned that climate change is actually largely a nonpartisan issue in South Florida. And you would never be, the kind of scare tactics that exist out there, that climate change is the boogeyman for all Republicans. You can't talk to Republicans about climate change. That was not what we found when we actually went and spoke to voters. registered Latino voters. And so we think that that is a trend that's actually reflective across the country. And we're excited to hear some pretty exciting pieces of information that we think is important to inform Latino policymakers or policymakers at large. It's that, of the Latino surveyed, 68% noted extreme weather related events, such as excessive heat and hurricanes, as their top climate concern. This was regardless of political party. We also learned that a major concern amongst Latino voters in Florida was the impact of extreme heat on the energy crisis. And you spoke about Ukraine and the gas tank and what, how people are being impacted right now. 56% worried about not being able to afford the financial burden of increased energy consumption. And that's because of the combination of rising costs of healthcare, rising costs of housing, rising costs of transportation. The burden of rising costs of energy consumption is really like the tipping point for many Latinos. Lastly, the survey also noted that 62% of those of the respondents, they want their elected officials to reduce air and water pollution and invest in clean, renewable energy to combat clean energy or climate change itself. And so this is exciting because, we've been tracking some of the data nationally. And, there was a Pew Research Center survey that noted that 8 in 10 U.S. Hispanics nationwide said that global climate change is affecting their local communities. And because everything is local, as Ray alluded to earlier, we think that this is a real exciting moment for people, communities, organizations like ours, but elected officials on the right and on the left to step up and really respond to climate change in a very immediate and urgent way. And so we're excited about that and being a part of that movement, and are eager to keep people more and more engaged.
And Rafael, given that you lead UnidosUS, the Action Fund, why did you feel it was really important to engage with Jessie and her team around this particular issue, given that it's not necessarily something that Latino organizations focus on?
That's such an important question. And, this is such an important collaboration because, first of all, at the end of the day, if we don't address this piece, the rest of it won't matter, right? I mean, this literally is our livelihoods and the future generations' quality of life on the line. And one of the things that's been clear in polling and the work that we've been doing around the country for quite some time is that Latinos are amongst the greenest voters and people that understand, that get the connection from our cultural backgrounds, as people from Latin America that are connected to the earth and nature, and the importance of that for our survival, for our quality of life. We understand these issues; they're very real to us, and the connection that came out in these surveys that we did with Dream Corps and Green for All, which our community gets, is the intersectionality of these issues. So one of these issues, there's a very strong connection, and we're going to talk more about this on the show in future episodes. There's a very strong connection between environmental issues and climate change and the rising water levels in South Florida with housing. Because now what's happening is that upper class people are moving away from the beach because the beach isn't safe anymore to live by, and are moving inland, and that's now displacing working class people, largely Latino and African American and Caribbean people in South Florida. So now all of our cousins in Miami are moving to, either rural Florida or outside of the state because they can't afford that part of the country anymore. So there's a lot of correlations with intersectionality with these issues. Health. I grew up in North Philly in a very urban community, and so many of my loved ones and neighbors and friends have asthma. We grew up with asthma because of the conditions that we grew up around, with the housing, with I remember there was a tire dump down the block from my house, the asbestos. So all of these issues, and our community gets that. And so that's why it's so important that we partner with professionals that understand our community, like Jessica Buendia at Green for All and Dream Corps, so that we can develop communication strategies, messaging strategies to not only tell the story of how our community is understanding these issues, but to advocate from a Latino perspective around why we need to get investments into addressing climate change and reducing carbon emissions now. Jessie, what I want to do, because it's one thing to talk about the work that we've done together, and it's so important, but I think it's important in our community that we engage to tell their own story. So I want to bring up a clip of a young woman, a young Latina college student in South Florida that we found in our canvassing, and she was very passionate about this issue. So let's hear a little bit from Sarah Ramirez, a community college student from Miami-Dade College, and I want to get Jessie's reaction to her commentary here on Found in Translation. Hold on, let's bring this up.
And work to make changes towards it. Thank you. Hello, my name is Sofia Ramirez, and I am a registered voter in Miami-Dade. I'm worried about the current state of our climate because it is negatively affecting several individuals, especially those that live in Florida. Climate change has brought an increase of heat, also known as heat waves, to an already hot place, creating many health issues.
All right, Jessie, let's start there. First of all, she's incredible, this young woman.
Oh
but
my gosh,
but the other thing is that heat level piece. So Jessie, when we talk about, again, that's a housing, that the intersection of housing, because if it's too hot where you live, you got to find somewhere else to live. And I have friends that have left the Southwest because they literally can't survive there because of their health, and they have to move to these, to the north, and then vice versa. So Jessie, we talk about that heat level piece for a moment, then we'll hear the rest from this young woman.
Yeah, I mean, what she's touching on absolutely is something that is the kind of messaging that she's talking about that actually affects people on the day-to-day. They feel the heat is going up, and they don't have the infrastructure in their communities to deal with it. You mentioned the housing crisis that we're currently in, and so we don't have safe places to actually live and house folks. Second, we don't actually have great insurance access. So when you actually have huge weather related events that affect your home, you don't have the money and the wealth to be able to rebuild those places.
Thank you.
And then we are talking about just the rising costs of electricity and utilities. And utilities, it's a space that I also have a background in. There are so many, like, I would say bureaucratic, but also like black box processes that are happening every single day with utilities, where they are not having putting the consumer at the center, and they're putting more profits at the center. And at the end of the day, we end up having to, as overburdened communities, deal with increasingly rising costs related to energy. And so, I mean, I would just say, and go back to, being a girl from Iowa, that our communities, are often in the agricultural sector, in the construction sector. We are outside every day. We are doing the jobs that other people don't want to do.
Thank you.
So we are definitely the most at risk of heat exhaustion and also death. And then I think about the amazing story that you shared of the woman, the leader who wanted to stay home with her mother. I mean, because of all of the different insecurity related to the energy portfolio and market, sometimes you would get blackouts, and that has immediate effects on vulnerable populations at home, who then they lose access to energy, but also obviously the cooling effects of air conditionings within their home.
So
and
Jessie, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'll just keep
No, that's okay. Trust me, I'm Puerto Rican. I know about not having electricity.
Right?
I mean, it's unbelievable. That's another story. But by the way, a big reason, I mean, let's be honest, then I'll hear the rest from her, is that why do we have such an emerging Puerto Rican population last 5 years in Florida and around the South, around the countries? We're environmental refugees from what happened with the hurricane and extreme weather and extreme conditions. Let's hear the rest of this quote, then we'll get back to Jessie's comments here on Found in Translation. This is good stuff.
Heat waves are known to cause people to become dizzy, get headaches, faint, and in extreme cases can be fatal. Other health issues caused by climate change are due to pollution, causing lung cancer, asthma, and heart disease. It's not too late to reduce climate change. Individuals can make small changes, but the government holds more power to instill laws and policies that will help the environment and human health by reducing climate change. I'd like to see leaders in our government care more about this issue and work to make changes towards it. Thank you.
First of all, she got my vote. My God, she's unbelievable.
Yeah, and also she has a job at Green for All. So. I think what she's saying is absolutely right. Our neighborhoods have often been located, in heat island areas where we have factories, busy highways, dense infrastructure. All of that leads to bad air quality and rising heat levels within those specific pockets of neighborhoods. And we're talking about like the zip code level pockets of neighborhoods. And Latinos are affected by that at higher rates than their white counterparts. And so they do have to deal, and, and it's a population that doesn't have access to health insurance or health treatment. And so all those issues are compounded. But she's amazing and she's right on. And I'm so excited that she's our future.
That's fantastic.
Well, you're an Iowa girl. I'm a Missouri boy, so we're neighbors. That's where I'm originally from. But really quickly, you were talking about air quality, but I would also throw in there water quality. I remember in the community where I lived, there was large beef and pork producing plants along with the railroad. We had the second largest railroad hub in Kansas City, Missouri. I think second only to Chicago. But I remember there were several times growing up where we couldn't drink the water because of a spill from the pork producing plant, right? We're talking about not good stuff in the water. And if you looked at where the community was located, I mean, most of those Mexican immigrants, right? My family's from Mexico too. That's where they worked, right? That's where they, yeah. And so water quality is also a big issue as well. So I appreciate you saying all of that. I mean, I think there's so much that you could talk about this from a myriad of different ways. And I think what you talked about has really shed some light on the issue itself. So Jessie, tell us how folks can get involved with Green for All, or just get involved in the movement, right, around making sure around climate and how they can be participatory. So any suggestions would be great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get involved with Green Corps' climate change campaign under Green for All, you just have to text Common Ground, that's COMMONGROUND, to 97483. 97483. You can also follow us on social media at Green for All on Twitter and at Dream Corps on Facebook and Instagram. You'll see a number of different, we're both really excited to mobilize leaders to take action around federal policy and statewide policy. But we are also passionate about lifting up folks on the ground who are actually making changes every day within their communities. And so being able to broadcast and tell those stories on the ground. And so please, please, please reach out to us. And then the last thing, we are celebrating for Earth Day.
Yes.
We have a scholarship fund that we're putting up for people interested, Black and Brown folks interested in entering into the clean energy sector. You will hear from us. Just jump on our social media feeds. We are very, very excited to provide this opportunity so that we're changing the face of what the environmental movement looks like. And so thanks everyone for that.
Before we wrap up, Rafael, I think I have to say this, and I would be remiss if I didn't. I think we've got to have you back on the show so we can talk about these electric vehicles, solar panels, everything else. I have solar panels on my home. It's made a difference in my electricity bill, right? And I want to do my part to reduce my carbon footprint. But we talk about going electric. I live right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, and the county executive has, bought like 45 buses that are going to be all electric to help reduce the carbon footprint of the county, but that's not enough. But then we talk about, you got to go electric, got to buy an electric car. Not many people can afford that. We're talking at, $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 car. I know that there's also been some legislation proposed to where, rebates would be available to families to buy electric vehicles. I know that's a subject for another day, but it also, I think, is part of this conversation about what are other options out there, right? That can help us to reduce our carbon footprint. People say there's things that you can do, but with this push around electric vehicles, they're not affordable. And for folks in our community, that is just a pipe dream. So I'd love to have that conversation later in the future, because I think that's also part of what we're talking about here.
That's also a major workforce development issue as it relates to the Latino community. Because who's going to put up all these solar panels, and who's going to build all these cars, and who's going to be the labor that moves the technology forward. So there's a tremendous opportunity, and telling you someone that basically lives at a construction site, we're the ones doing all the real work here, including some Latina Central American immigrants that doing all the drywall in this neighborhood. So, there's also has to be an economic lens, and I think that's going to be another way to bring in our community. Jessica Buendia, thank you so much. You've been such a great spirit here on the show. We definitely have to have you back, and our partnership with the UnidosUS Action Fund and Green for All Dream Corps has been, a great blessing. And we continue to want to work with you. Any final thoughts you want to share with the Found Translation community?
No, just the importance of your show and how great it is at bringing the intersection of issue areas together under one umbrella. I think that is the thing, is that we're complicated, right? As people, like our lived realities in this world are complicated, are intersectional. You can't take things apart easily. And so I feel like what has inspired me around climate change is it's an umbrella that actually touches all of our lives, from transportation to housing to where we live to how where we can and cannot live, as we get pushed out of communities. And it really is about just everyone wants to come to this country, not for the economic opportunities, but also because they want to live in healthy, thriving, safe neighborhoods. And so how do we ensure that happens with the infrastructure investments that have already been approved, let alone the future investments that hopefully together we'll be able to pass? And so that, I think, is an exciting opportunity for us, and one that is our responsibility.
Thank you so much, Jessica Buendia from Dream Corps Green for All. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we look forward to continue to working with you. Thank you again. Enrique and I are going to wrap up the show. But thank you. You're going to be back very soon, and all the best to you, and we'll be in touch on all the above. Thank you so much. So that was Jessica Buendia from Dream Corps Green for All. Wow, what a life force. And there's like 2 or 3, 4, 5, 7, 14 topics. She needs her own show. Jessica just got too much going on here.
I agree. The intersectionality of all of this is great. You touched upon something really quickly around the workforce piece. When I was at the Labor Department, one of the things that we were doing in Rust Belt states was during the decline of the automotive industry, right? If you remember that early on, and the housing crisis that we faced during the first few years of the Obama administration, was looking, how do we look to provide job training for the jobs of the future, and one was around climate. And how do we get these welders, for example, if you were a welder working on a windmill, right? I mean, we know that these are jobs of the future. Again, another topic to talk about, but I think it's so important that we talk about how these all intertwine, and you cannot separate one from the other. So
and this is on us. This is on us right now, Enrique, because as we talked about, what the Biden administration has not showed off about what they've done. The infrastructure bill passed. There's a whole piece here related to, sort of new energy and, building.
That's right.
Rebuilding our grid and, fiber, providing rural and poor communities, largely Latino, broadband access. We saw the images of kids, sitting in McDonald's parking lots during the pandemic to log into school. And again, I go back to who's going to build all this stuff. Yeah. Some of it, you still have a few 50-something-year-old white guys with hard hats in the Midwest. There's still a couple of them. But the reality is it's going to be a diverse workforce, not just in ethnicity, but in gender. There's a lot of Latinas are going to be, on these construction sites and building our country. So there's
Absolutely.
a lot here that we have to not only inform our community around what's already happening and opportunities they can tap into, but also how we need to hold all these stakeholders accountable, so that, we get our equitable piece of the pie, not only in the services, but in the work that's going to be needed to provide these services from, in that case, the infrastructure bill. I did want to announce before Enrique wraps this up that we've made some exciting decisions here as part of our podcast platform. So Found in Translation, the original show that's been going strong for 9 years. We went on a hiatus for various reasons, part of which because we were sort of rebooting a few of our programs. So Found in Translation will remain as our politics and news talk show. So check us out every Friday. We're going to release a show, and Enrique is going to talk in a minute about what our themes will be next week. But Bomba Live is not going away. So this is actually an exclusive, Enrique. No one's heard this publicly yet. I've sort of alluded to it. Bomba Live is going to, not only in a yearly basis, going to be a special program related to celebrating the accomplishments and the excellence of the Puerto Rican community, which Bomba Live 3 will have announcements later on about when Bomba Live 3 takes place. But Bomba Live as a regular show will continue as more of a Latino variety culture a show, kind of we're going to be kind of like the Puerto Rican Breakfast Club at Bomba Live. And I'm very excited to announce that Betty D from Sweet Sensation, the 90s dance pop diva, has agreed to be my permanent co-host on that show. So we're gonna have a lot of fun, a lot of celebrities, a lot of entertainers. And Enrique, I know you know about music people. We got to get making movies on there, and some of the other people from your network. So excited, more announcements to come on that. But Found in Translation will sort of stay in the political news lane moving forward, and really excited to keep having these conversations. Now, Enrique, we've got some very important things to talk about on next week's show.
That's right, Rafael. Next week, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the ongoing immigration policy debate that's currently happening in Washington and how that impacts our southern border. You definitely don't want to miss it. We're going to have a guest on who is really steeped in this and can talk to it in particular detail about the implications of where we are with the current policy debate and reforms that we'll be talking about next week. So make sure you join us for that. Again, thank you for joining Found in Translation. You can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or on any audio podcast platforms. And looking forward to having you join us every week as we bring national politics to the barrio and hear from national leaders on issues impacting nuestra comunidad.
Have a great Earth Day, and have a great week, familia.